Single dad millionaire finds bride chained in the forest. What he does next will shock. The mist clung to the forest floor like a heavy blanket that morning, thick with the scent of damp pine and old earth. The woods should have been peaceful, the kind of place where you find quiet, not terror. James Whitaker, a rugged man in his late 30s, tightened the straps on his daughter's backpack, smiling at the way little Maisie chattered about fireflies and marshmallows. They had come here for a weekend of simple living far from the painful noise of the city. But sometimes fate changes its mind. A cry, thin, broken, not quite human, slithered through the trees. James froze, every instinct sharpened, scanning the shadows. Somewhere beyond the maples and pines, someone needed saving, and James, a man who had already lost too much, wasn't the kind to walk away. He just didn't know that what he was about to find would change the course of his life forever. The leaves crackled underfoot as James moved cautiously forward, leaving Maisie behind near the campfire with strict instructions not to wander. Every step felt heavier, the distant cry tugging at some old wound he thought had long since healed. The clearing appeared almost suddenly, a hollow ringed by ancient oaks, the sunlight struggling to reach the ground. There, chained against the twisted trunk of a tree, was a woman. Her white dress, torn and stained with earth, clung to her slender frame. Her wrists were bloodied where rusted iron bit into her skin. Her dark hair, tangled and wild, hid most of her face except for her eyes. Wide, terrified, pleading. James staggered forward, the sight knocking the breath from his chest. Hey, it's okay," he murmured, kneeling beside her, careful not to startle. "I'm James. Can you tell me your name?" The woman's lips trembled. "Hannah," she whispered, voice ragged. "Please, don't let them find me." He scanned the chains, old but thick, no obvious locks. Whoever had done this wanted her to stay lost. "I'm getting you out," James said, his voice steady even as fear gnawed at his insides. He pulled a hunting knife from his belt and started working on the thickest chain links. His hands moved quickly, but his ears strained for any sound, a branch breaking, footsteps crunching, the nightmare of someone returning. They said, "I ran from fate," Hannah choked out between shivers. That refusing him meant punishment. "Who?" James asked sharply. Her eyes darted to the dark beyond the trees. "A man who believes money can buy souls." James swallowed hard, redoubling his efforts. It didn't matter who was out there. What mattered was getting her free and getting her and Maisie the hell out of these woods. The metal gave a harsh screech as he snapped the last chain. Hannah slumped into him, her whole body trembling. James caught her easily, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. "You're safe now," he said firmly, though the chill running down his spine told him safety was still a long ways off. With Hannah cradled in his arms, James moved back toward the camp. The forest felt different now, watching, waiting. Maisie gasped when she saw them. "Daddy, who's that lady?" "A friend who needs our help," James said gently. "Come on, Peanut. We have to move fast." As he loaded Hannah into his pickup and buckled Maisie into the back seat, a movement near the tree line caught his eye. A flash of black. A figure half hidden, standing still, watching. James gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wasn't just rescuing a stranger, he had just stepped into a storm he didn't yet understand. But it was too late to turn back now. The truck rumbled down the gravel road, every bump jostling Hannah's trembling form beside James. She sat curled in his jacket, staring out the window but seeing nothing. Maisie, ever perceptive despite her age, stayed quiet in the back seat. She clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly, her wide eyes flickering between her father and their broken guest. The farmhouse rose ahead like a lighthouse through a storm. White clappered walls weathered by decades of wind and rain, a porch light flickering weakly in the gathering dusk. James pulled up close to the house and killed the engine. He turned to Hannah, speaking low and steady. "You're safe here," he said, his voice a lifeline. "Nobody can hurt you under my roof." Hannah nodded faintly, but her hands clutched the door handle like a trap was waiting on the other side. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and cedar, lived in and warm. James guided her gently to the couch, the soft lamplight casting gold across her bruised skin. "I'll get the first aid kit," he said, disappearing into the kitchen. Left alone, Hannah's body remained rigid. Her gaze flickered across the room. Pictures on the mantel, a knitted throw draped over the armchair. Maisie's colorful drawings taped to the fridge. It was too normal, too safe, and she didn't trust it. When James returned, kneeling before her with bandages and antiseptic, Hannah flinched without meaning to. "Easy," he said, his touch feather-light. "I'm not here to hurt you." Still, her body vibrated with tension as he cleaned the cuts on her wrists and ankles. She didn't speak, didn't cry. She simply endured. "You're good at this," she rasped, eventually, voice cracking. James gave a faint smile. "Army medic, before I started my business. And now you're—" She trailed off, uncertain. "Now I'm just a guy with a kid, a few acres, and a stubborn heart," James said simply. Maisie tiptoed closer, holding something in her small hands. A flower, battered from the wind, its petals curling inward. "This is for you," she said shyly, offering it to Hannah. "Daddy says even broken things can be beautiful." Hannah stared at the flower, something raw and aching flickering in her chest. With trembling fingers, she took it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice nearly swallowed by the crackling fire. James watched the exchange silently, something heavy settling in his chest. He recognized that look in Hannah's eyes. It was the look of someone who hadn't been given a gift without a price in a very, very long time. That night, after tucking Maisie into bed, James found Hannah standing barefoot at the window, staring out into the night. "You think they'll come," he said quietly. Hannah nodded once. "Not think. No." James crossed the room and stood beside her, not touching, just offering his presence like a shield. "I'm not letting anyone take you," he said. "You're not alone anymore." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the wind brushed against the house, whispering secrets through the eaves. Inside, something fragile, hope, maybe, began to stir between them. The days that followed stitched themselves together slowly like a patchwork quilt, uneven, imperfect, but warm enough to shelter them. Hannah moved through James's farmhouse with careful, measured steps, never letting herself grow too comfortable. She kept her sneakers on, even when the floor was scrubbed clean and the air inside smelled of fresh bread and lemon oil. She memorized escape routes: the back door by the kitchen, the window near the pantry, the hidden latch to the cellar beneath the stairs. At night, while James read stories to Maisie by the fireplace, Hannah sat with her back against the wall, counting breaths, waiting for the crash of boots against the door. But the crash never came. Instead, there was only Maisie's laughter and James's low, steady voice and the clink of silverware at dinner. Little by little, the walls inside her mind began to loosen. She started folding laundry beside James, her fingers moving faster when she realized she wasn't being watched. She brewed coffee in the mornings, learning the small joy of its bitter warmth. And every time Maisie slipped her small hand into Hannah's without a second thought, something tight and strangled inside her heart loosened a little more. Still, the fear never fully left her. It crouched just behind her ribs, a silent, heavy thing. One afternoon, while Maisie was chasing butterflies across the front yard, Hannah found herself standing on the porch, James beside her. "She's fearless," Hannah said, her voice low. James smiled, his arms folded loosely across his chest. "She's her mother's daughter." Hannah hesitated, sensing a sorrow deeper than words beneath his casual tone. "Is she?" James nodded slowly. "Gone. 5 years now, drunk driver, there 1 minute, gone the next." Hannah looked down, guilt twisting in her stomach. How could she burden a man who had already lost so much? "I'm sorry," she whispered. James shook his head. "Don't be. We had good years. That's what I hold on to." The sun dipped low, painting the fields in shades of amber and violet. For a few moments they simply stood together, the silence between them rich, unhurried. Then a scream shattered the stillness. "Maisie." James's body reacted before his mind could catch up, vaulting off the porch and sprinting across the yard. Hannah was right behind him, her breath hitching painfully in her chest. They reached the chicken coop in seconds, but Maisie wasn't there. "Maisie!" James roared, fear slicing into his voice. Hannah stumbled toward the trees, heart hammering in her ears. She saw shadows everywhere, grabbing hands, flashing teeth. "No!" she gasped, falling to her knees, her hands clawing at the ground. "Not again! Not again!" James grabbed her by the shoulders, trying to steady her. "Hannah, look at me." She shook her head, sobbing. "They took my sister when we were kids. She wandered too far, and I couldn't save her. I can't lose another child." James's heart broke as he listened, hearing the weight she had carried, the guilt that had festered like an old wound. "You won't," he said fiercely. "Not this time. We'll find her." A rustling noise interrupted them, then a small voice. "I'm sorry," Maisie whimpered, stepping out from behind the woodshed, clutching a tiny, shivering kitten. "She was cold. I just wanted to save her." Hannah let out a choking sob of relief. She ran to Maisie, scooping her up and holding her so tightly the girl squeaked. "You're safe," Hannah whispered, rocking her back and forth. "You're safe." James stood beside them, his fists clenching and unclenching. He knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, he wasn't just protecting a stranger anymore. He was protecting family. The farmhouse glowed in the soft embrace of evening. A fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting slow-moving shadows across the walls. Maisie was curled up on the couch beneath a handmade quilt, the kitten she had named Clover tucked against her chest. James and Hannah sat in the kitchen nursing cups of tea that had long since gone cold. Neither spoke. It was the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy, like the weight of unspoken confessions filling the air between them. Hannah's fingers toyed with the chipped rim of her mug. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. "You should know the truth. James didn't push, just nodded once, letting her choose her own moment. Hannah stared at the reflection of the flame dancing in the dark window. Her jaw tightened. "His name is Vincent Langley," she said. "He comes from money so old it smells of dust and blood." James leaned forward slightly, every muscle in his body coiled with tension. He knew the Langley name, knew it the way everyone in town knew it, the way you knew a wildfire when you saw smoke on the horizon. "I was 23, waiting tables, alone after my mother passed. Vincent saw me." Her voice cracked. "He didn't see a person, he saw a prize, a possession to own." The story spilled out of her in halting fragments. How he had offered her help, opportunity, a new life. How kindness turned into control. How the walls of his mansion became her cage. "I wasn't allowed to leave without permission. I wasn't allowed to speak to old friends. Even my clothes were bought and owned by him." James's hand tightened around his mug, his knuckles white. "And when I tried to run, they caught me, dragged me back, said if I embarrassed him again, he'd make sure no one ever found me." She lifted her eyes to meet his, full of a sorrow so deep it seemed bottomless. "And I believed him." James reached across the table, covering her trembling hand with his larger, steadier one. "You're not his," he said firmly. "Not now. Not ever." A faint, broken smile ghosted across her lips. "You don't understand," she said. "Vincent doesn't lose. Not ever. And he will burn the world down to prove it." Before James could respond, the crunch of tires on gravel snapped both their heads toward the window. A truck, unmarked. A delivery driver stepping out, carrying a garment bag draped over one arm and a small ivory envelope in his free hand. James was on his feet instantly, the hair on the back of his neck standing up. The driver smiled casually, unaware of the tension crackling through the air. "Package for a Miss Hannah," he said. James took the items without a word and slammed the door shut. Hannah stared at the bag as if it were a snake poised to strike. Her hands began to tremble. She tore open the envelope first, her breath catching painfully as she unfolded the heavy cardstock. One line written in a script she knew too well. "You can hide in the dirt for a while, but you'll never outrun me. I own you, forever." The wax seal below the signature, the Langley family crest, seemed to burn against the paper. Hannah unzipped the garment bag with mechanical precision. Inside, gleaming in white, was a wedding dress. Not the tattered one she'd worn when James found her. No, this was new. Pristine, luxurious, exactly the dress she had once dared to describe to Vincent long ago when she still thought dreams were safe things. Hannah's knees buckled. The room tilted. James caught her before she hit the floor, cradling her against him as her body shook with silent, heaving sobs. "He's never going to stop," she gasped. "I thought I could escape, but I was wrong, so wrong." James pressed his forehead to hers, their tears mixing. "Then let him come," he whispered fiercely. "He'll find out exactly what it means to lose." Morning came wrapped in a hush, the kind of heavy silence that clings before a storm breaks. Golden sunlight spilled across the worn wood floors of the farmhouse, painting everything in soft, drowsy light. Hannah stood barefoot by the window, her cold mug of tea forgotten in her hands. She wasn't watching the sunrise. She was staring down her fear. James came up behind her, his steps careful, respectful. He didn't touch her, but his presence folded around her like a shield. "You don't have to decide anything today," he said, his voice a low rumble of comfort. Hannah turned, and the look in her eyes startled him. Not fear, steel. "I'm done running," she said. The words trembled but didn't break. "If I run again, he wins. He owns the fear. He owns me." James swallowed hard, pride and worry warring in his chest. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I have to stop being afraid of shadows. I have to pull them into the light." And with that, a plan began to form. James made a call to Evelyn Carter, a woman he trusted more than most family. Evelyn had once dismantled a corrupt senator's empire with nothing but a phone call and a mountain of evidence. She didn't blink when James explained what was happening. "We'll set a trap," Evelyn said coolly over speakerphone, "but we do it on our terms." The plan was simple, brutal, and full of risk. Hannah would invite Vincent to the farmhouse under the guise of surrender. She would wear a hidden recorder. Officers would be staged nearby, ready to move the moment he incriminated himself. Hannah agreed without flinching. "If I don't fight him," she said quietly, "there's a girl out there right now just like I was, and she might not get lucky enough to find someone like you." James didn't trust himself to speak. He just reached out and took her hand, holding it tightly in his calloused palm. The day Vincent was meant to arrive, the farmhouse was stripped bare of anything fragile. Maisie had been sent to stay safely with a neighbor, her absence cutting through the house like a missing heartbeat. Hannah wore simple jeans and a soft green sweater. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, no chains, no masks, just herself. James watched her from the porch, his heart hammering. He had fought in wars, he had seen death. But he had never known fear like the thought of losing her. A sleek black sedan kicked up dust on the long driveway. Vincent Langley stepped out. He was the picture of wealth and entitlement. Pressed suit, polished shoes, a smile like a razor blade. "Darling," he called out, spreading his arms as if welcoming her home. "You look rustic." Hannah didn't flinch. "You came alone?" she asked, her voice steady. Vincent chuckled. "Do I need backup to retrieve my property?" James's blood boiled at the word, but he stayed hidden, muscles coiled, waiting. Vincent sauntered forward, the easy arrogance of a man who believed the world bent at his command. "I forgive you," he said lightly. "This little tantrum of yours, it's beneath you. You'll see that once you're back where you belong." Hannah forced a brittle laugh. "And where is that, Vincent? Shackled to your side?" His expression darkened. "You forget who owns you." "Say it," she whispered. "Say it for me." Vincent leaned closer, his voice a hiss against her skin. "I bought you. You breathe because I allow it." That was the moment. Before he could blink, James was on him, moving with a soldier's precision, tackling Vincent hard into the dirt. Sirens screamed down the road seconds later. Officers swarmed. Evelyn strode up, holding a recorder triumphantly in the air. "It's over," she said coldly. "We have everything." Vincent thrashed, spitting threats and venom. But his voice didn't matter anymore. Hannah stood over him unflinching, unbroken. And when James reached for her hand, she didn't hesitate. She laced her fingers through his and stepped into the light. The storm came fast. Within hours of Vincent Langley's arrest, his face flooded every news station in America. The world that had once whispered about the Langley dynasty now screamed the truth across headlines. Billionaire Vincent Langley arrested in abuse scandal. Voices of the silenced speak out. One by one, women who had been trapped by his promises stepped into the light. their stories weaving a tapestry of courage and sorrow. Hannah's recording became the match that lit the fire. But she didn't watch the news coverage. She didn't need to. Instead, she walked barefoot through James's fields in the early mornings, feeling the soft, forgiving earth between her toes. She planted a garden behind the farmhouse, her hands sinking deep into the soil. Tomatoes, peppers, basil. She tended each sprout like a promise, to herself, to the life she was building. Maisie was always at her side, her pockets full of seed packets, her laughter rising like music into the blue sky. There were still bad nights. Shadows still lurked sometimes at the edges of Hannah's dreams. But they didn't own her anymore. She woke up in a home filled with the smell of coffee and warm bread, with James leaning against the doorframe, smiling at her like she was the first sunrise he'd seen in years. She learned to hum again, to dance clumsily in the kitchen with Maisie, to believe that laughter could be safe. James never rushed her, never asked for more than she could give. He just showed up every morning, every evening, offering steadiness in a world that had once been nothing but quicksand. And slowly, Hannah realized, she wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. One afternoon, as they planted rows of sunflowers by the old oak tree, Maisie looked up with a bright, gap-toothed grin. "You're not scared anymore," she said matter-of-factly, wiping dirt on her cheeks. Hannah knelt in the soil beside her, brushing a wild curl from Maisie's forehead. "No, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm not." "Good," Maisie said, wrapping her arms around Hannah's neck. "I like this you best." James watched from the porch, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't name. Pride, love, awe. He had never tried to save Hannah. He had simply stood beside her while she saved herself. And somewhere along the way, she had saved him too, reminding him that trust wasn't a weakness, that hope wasn't foolish, and that love didn't have to hurt. That evening, as fireflies blinked across the fields and the last light bled from the sky, Hannah found James sitting on the porch swing. Clover the kitten sprawled across his lap. She sat down beside him, the wood creaking softly beneath their combined weight. For a long moment they simply swung back and forth, the stars threading themselves across the velvet sky. Then Hannah turned to him, her voice low and sure. "I'm not running anymore." James set Clover gently aside and turned fully toward her. "You don't ever have to," he said, brushing his thumb across her cheekbone. Tears shimmered in Hannah's eyes, but she didn't look away. "I'm choosing to stay," she whispered. "Not because I'm trapped, not because I'm afraid, but because I want to." James smiled then, the slow, unstoppable kind of smile that only comes when something broken has finally truly healed. He reached out and took her hand, their fingers intertwining like the roots of the garden she had planted. Side by side they sat beneath the stars, hearts beating steady and sure, not because they had to, but because they chose to. The forest was alive that morning, not with fear, but with something sweeter, hope. Birdsong threaded through the trees, and golden sunlight filtered down in warm, dappled pools across the forest floor. In the very clearing where Hannah had once knelt in chains, an arch now stood, woven from ivy, wildflowers, and love, crafted carefully by James's own hands. There were no white carpets, no velvet ropes, just earth beneath their feet and the sky overhead, endless and free. Hannah walked slowly up the forest path, her arm linked with Maisie's. Her dress was simple, soft ivory linen that moved with her like a second skin. No corsets, no glittering jewels. Just freedom stitched into every seam. Maisie skipped ahead, tossing petals into the air from a hand-woven basket, her giggles trailing behind her like music. James waited beneath the arch, his heart thundering in his chest. He wore no tuxedo, just a clean white shirt, his sleeves rolled up, a sprig of lavender tucked into his breast pocket. When Hannah's eyes met his, everything else fell away. The scars, the fear, the years of surviving instead of living. They all melted into nothing in the light of that look. James reached out as she neared, his hands steady, his smile breaking wide and open. Hannah placed her hand in his without hesitation. And together they turned to the small circle of people gathered around them. Evelyn, a few close neighbors, and Lily clutching Clover the kitten against her chest. There were no fancy vows, no rehearsed promises. Just words spoken from the marrow of their bones. There was a time, Hannah began, her voice trembling with emotion, when I thought freedom meant running, getting far enough away that no one could ever hurt me again. She paused, her eyes shining. But I learned something here. I learned that true freedom isn't about escape. It's about choosing to stay when it's safe. About building something new where something old once broke. About planting your feet and letting yourself bloom. She turned fully to James, her voice steadying. I choose you. Not because I need saving, not because I'm afraid, but because when I found the courage to save myself, you were there, waiting. You saw me, not as broken, but as whole. James's throat tightened. He squeezed her hand before speaking. And I choose you, he said, voice thick with emotion. Not because you needed me, but because you taught me how to believe again. You reminded me that love isn't about possession. It's about partnership, trust, home. Maisie clapped her hands together, unable to contain her joy. Just kiss already, she yelled, and the small gathering burst into laughter. James chuckled, shaking his head. Well, Peanut's got a point. And then, without hesitation, he leaned in and kissed Hannah beneath the arch. Beneath the trees that had once borne silent witness to her pain. The kiss was not rushed, not showy. It was steady, sure, and filled with the kind of love that grows not from fairy tales but from real earth, watered with patience and sunlight and second chances. The crowd cheered, and Maisie ran forward to throw the last of her flower petals over them both, giggling wildly. Hannah laughed, a sound full and bright, carrying up into the branches, startling a flock of birds into flight. Freedom wasn't a place you found by running. It was something you chose, standing still, hand in hand with the people who made you feel truly seen. Later they celebrated with a simple feast under the trees, homemade bread, berry pies, wild honey from a neighbor's hives. There were no speeches, no grand declarations, just laughter, music, and the quiet knowledge that this life, was theirs now. Not a rescue, not a survival, a beginning, chosen, together. Sometimes we believe freedom lies in the act of running, away from pain, away from fear, away from the chains that once held us captive. But true freedom, the kind that lasts, doesn't come from how fast you can escape. It comes from where you choose to stand. Hannah's journey reminds us that healing isn't a straight line. It's messy, it's terrifying. It asks you to trust again after you've been broken. To plant roots in the very soil where your heart was once shattered. It takes unbelievable courage not just to survive, but to stay. To say, this is my life now, and I will not let fear own it. The people who walk beside us, the ones who don't try to fix us but simply hold the light steady until we're ready to step into it, are the ones who teach us what real love looks like. Not control, not possession, but partnership. Home isn't always the place you came from. Sometimes home is the place you choose to build with trembling hands and hopeful hearts. And sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that begin right where everything once fell apart. If this story touched your heart today, if it reminded you that healing is possible and love is worth believing in, we invite you to join our community. Subscribe to Golden Tales, where every week we share powerful journeys of hope, healing, and the quiet strength inside us all. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes choosing to stay is the bravest thing you'll ever do. Pukal.